We're going to get started right away today instead of waiting for stragglers. We have 4 readings that we're going to cover in this period of time, and I know that a lot of you have classes afterwards, so we'll get started. I'm Judy Wilson. I am the Director of Creative Writing here at SMSU, and I want to thank all of you for coming, especially those family members and friends who came to show their support for the hard work and accomplishments of these young writers. This senior portfolio reading is more than just a capstone requirement. This is a day to honor the literary achievements and to recognize these young writers officially as authors in the world with a reach that is not confined to the SMSU community. We have every confidence that they will be embraced by the greater world of writers and readers, by editors and publishers, and we're awfully proud that they chose SMSU as the place to start this journey. Each one of these 4 authors is going to be presenting multiple pieces, so we ask that you hold your applause until they have read their final piece. Each person has read their final piece, okay? The first to present today will be Taylor Wolteisen. Taylor is a senior at SMSU, majoring in creative writing with a passion for writing mostly poetry and fiction. She started writing in 8th grade and has gone on to develop a humorous, blunt, and colorful, yet sometimes serious, writing style that spans multiple genres, all driven by a vivid imagination and music lyrics. Taylor has won various writing awards, mainly for poetry, throughout high school and college, most notably awards from Creating Spaces and the Scholastic Writing Awards, along with scholarships while attending SMSU. In addition, her flash fiction piece, Devourer, was recently published in the 13th volume of Perceptions. She's unsure of what career path to take with her degree after graduating at the moment, but knows for sure that she'd like to move from her hometown of Egerton, Minnesota, to somewhere out of state for a change of scenery and a new adventure. Please welcome Taylor Wolthuizen.
All right, so my first piece I will be reading is a short story called Bruised. I originally started writing this piece for one of my classes, and it started with the idea of I got this idea of the moon being the color purple, and I just kind of took that and I ran with it, and this piece kind of came from just thinking about that. Why can't the moon be purple? I know there's blue and blood moons, otherwise it's this chalky white color. It looks like something my teacher would draw on black paper. The moon must get angry because it throws rocks that somehow make it here. I throw things too sometimes when I'm angry, mainly softer things because otherwise I might break something and my parents will yell. I once threw a building block against the wall after a rough day at school and managed to chip the paint. My room was painted blue, but there was purple paint underneath. Apparently when my parents were expecting me, they thought I was going to be a girl, but I ended up being a boy, so they made my brother paint it baby blue. They were going to name her Jackie, but they shortened it to Jack. But I'm not a baby anymore. I'm in 3rd grade, and my brother, George, is in 10th grade. I think my school is fun, but he doesn't. I think it might be because his teachers don't like him. My mom and dad throw things at each other like I do in dodgeball sometimes. They get way into it because I hear them yell at each other and glass break on the hardwood floor. When they have people over, they're as nice as pie to each other, and you would think we were a happy family. Sometimes we are, but most of the time, I'm not happy. When I cry, it seems to rain those nights when I need the moon most so I can ask him about stuff, but I wonder if he cries with me. It rains a lot here, and I have a hard time falling asleep on a dry pillow anymore. I don't tell the other kids or any adults about this because I was told not to, plus I wouldn't know what to say. Kids in my class get made fun of for crying and nicknamed crybabies, but I don't see anything wrong with crying. I cuddle up with a teddy bear and cry on him after I throw him, worried that I hurt him, even though I didn't mean to. Whenever that happens, I started dotting him with a purple marker to make it look like he was bruised, so that I would look at them and remember not to hurt him again. He looks like he has purple chicken pox, but still has a smile on his face. I would think he'd be sore by now with all the boo-boos. My boo-boos heal up pretty quickly, but I think the moon has them forever. Gray spots the size of countries cover the moon, and I wonder who hurt him. This guy Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, and I think he might have something to do with it. The moon throws those rocks, and it aims for Neil. It's weird that the moon's bruises aren't purple like mine are, because I think purple would be a pretty color on the moon, but I wouldn't want to hurt the moon. He might never come back. He's the only one I can talk to besides George, but he's not always home. My parents never said I couldn't talk to the moon. The sun's a bright guy, and he's too intense, so the moon and I become friends. I wonder if they don't like each other, and that's why I don't see them at the same time. The stars are pretty too, but they talk among themselves and leave the moon and I to our time. They make shapes, but I can never seem to find any besides the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper. The stars look like cereal someone spilled and never cleaned up. Fruity Pebbles are my favorite. I spilled them all over the floor one morning. My mom reassured me that it was an accident, and I helped her clean up until my dad came down and saw me throw them in the trash. It looked like throw up, but it was pretty against the hardwood floor. Then Dad hit me, and some stars paid a visit during the day. My eye was bruised for a few days. As far as the school is concerned, I was sick. He made me eat what was left on the floor until the pebbles actually did turn to puke, so technically they weren't lying. When I did show up to school, the teachers were always asking me where I got my purple accessories. I was all the rage among the teachers, and they wanted to track down the designer. I was too unique. I had pea rock dust on my hands and the back of my pants, so they never believed that I got them on the playground. George grew bangs over his eyes and wore black makeup in case his eyes made an appearance. If nobody saw his scars or bruises, that meant he was never hurt. He did play hide and don't ever seek again. He also told me I should start playing on the equipment more so then teachers wouldn't think those purple spots were from the playground. They didn't actually have to be, but the teachers wouldn't be able to prove me wrong. Once I got older and wouldn't have recess anymore, then what would I do? George said by the time I got to high school, I wouldn't have to hide them anymore because when he turned 18, he was going to raise me. He's 16 now, so I wouldn't have to play with the other kids too much, which is good. They're too happy for my liking, which is why I never have friends over. I don't have any friends. George had a friend he hung out with. His friend goes by a number instead of a name, and orange must be his favorite color. For now, I'll call him Stan. Stan and George listened to death metal in George's room at a volume that shook my windows. It must have scared the moon because he was shaking. Until I found out that it was a type of music, I asked them if metal was a living thing. I couldn't imagine having a conversation with a piece of aluminum. The guys in their music were always yelling. I never understood why they or my dad had to yell everything. George and Stan dyed their hair a bright shade of purple one time. George stood by the window one night and his hair had moonbeam highlights. I'm sure the moon filled his pupils because it was full and he was spaced off in its direction. I don't know what was wrong that night, and I don't know if I want to. It made me think him and the moon had enough conversations that he could talk with his eyes. That's the only time he would pin his bangs back. I don't remember the color of George's eyes anymore, and Stan hasn't been here for the last few weeks. George worked at the gas station. People paid for gas to go places while him and I stayed in this house. I told him when he took me away, the place needed to tower above the trees and have a window with no curtains. The moon could continue to look down on me, know all my secrets, and not judge me. My teddy bear with its purple spots judged me, my dad yelled, and my brother looked on me with bangs of understanding. I know my dad had friends too, but Mom would never let me meet them. Dad said he would introduce me to them when I turned 21. Their names were Jack Daniels and Captain Morgan. Mom told Dad to stay as far away from them as possible. She told me the same thing about the kids at school. I always avoided hugs. I felt like I was getting smothered. Not being able to breathe is a scary thing. George came home one night with purple marks on his neck. I think someone tried to strangle him. One night I was talking to the moon, listening to a song called Purple Rain. If rain could be purple, why not the moon? Before I could think about it more, I heard something in the rose bushes. A girl in clothes that must have been my size on someone George's age. I heard George's door slam shut and the front one open. I opened my door crack and heard a girl's voice mixed with George's. They got louder and her perfume made my nose bunch up. I never heard George's door shut like it usually did. I opened mine and saw a blue light leak into the hallway. So it was open. Holding my breath, I tiptoed out and went by his door. I looked in, saw George and this girl with no shirt biting his neck. She must have been a vampire, and I know they live forever. So if she bit my brother, would that mean my brother was going to live forever? If I lost him, I would be really sad. I know the moon is there every night, but George has been there when I needed him day or night, until he started spending the night at her house more. Since he was gone more, Stan hasn't been around lately. I listened to Purple Rain on repeat without the death metal rattling the house. It was background music for my conversations with the moon. I looked back at the chip in my wall when the moon found it. The moon was concerned about it. I explained why it was purple, but I got the feeling the moon didn't believe me, which is what made me ask George when he came back wearing the vampire girl's perfume why he had to paint the room purple. He said it was because they were originally expecting a girl, but not a boy. And I had heard about how I was supposed to be Jackie, and George got a weird look on his face. Apparently I wasn't supposed to be named Jackie. Jackie died before I came along. Jackie had died in Mom's stomach. All three of us had been in the same stomach, but why did Jackie die and not us? George said it's just one of those things. While we were at it, I asked George what all those things were on his neck. He said I'd find out when I met a girl I liked. It doesn't seem like there was a lot I couldn't learn now. How long would I have to wait to find out why the moon wasn't purple? George patted me on the head and started walking away. Before he went in his room, I ran to him and actually hugged him. He held me and asked me what was bothering me. As I was trying to garner the words in my mind, he reached in his pocket for a ponytail and tied back his bangs. I noticed he had a scratch on his face. George had been gone with that girl so much the last few nights that he wasn't supposed to around to upset Dad. He saw me looking at it and said the vampire girl did it. I watched him pull his shirt off, and as he turned, the scratches and other markings curled from his back, coming to light before the rest of his skin. I was always worried about who hurt the moon, but I never thought to ask George who was hurting him. He probably would have said nobody, because if nobody could see your scars or bruises, you were never hurt. If he knew he had these markings, he was admitting his pain. He said he gave her permission to do that to him. He acknowledged that as love. What else had either of us known? Dad could hit us with one hand and high-five us with the other. I looked him in the eyes for what felt like the first time, and I could see he meant it. My reflection bobbed on top of his multiplying tears. He blinked and made one race down his cheek. His eyes were black, but there was no makeup running. I touched a scar on his back, and he winced. George was revealing not only his secrets, but himself to me. He was answering questions I never thought to ask. George, why isn't the moon purple? Because not everybody gets bruised like we do, Jack. All right, so that's the end of my fiction piece. The rest of my pieces are all poetry. They're rather short, except for the last one. They're just kind of, just general musings I have, and I just kind of write about whatever strikes me. So there's not really too much of a story behind these. They're just what I like to write. My first poem is Erased. The tattoos under your clothes, who do you show them to? Ink can't be erased easily. It takes a lot of trust to let someone put graffiti on the walls built around your heart. I spent intimate moments with someone who reminded me of you, minus the tattoo. Next one is Flesh Wound. You grazed against my flesh as I lusted. Your bullet left a wound that got infected and still festers at your touch. Then this one is Insatiable. My kind of hunger requires soft love. It comes from a stomach with a wolf's growl and longs for someone to hear it. My last one is the longest one. It's called I Long to Be a Robot. I wish I was born a robot. I want someone else to program me, because when I'm left to my own devices, I make it so my software glitches and it constantly miscalculates the probability of disaster. If I did have a malfunction, I would need to go to a robotic engineer and be repaired. No therapy, no support groups, no friends, no human contact. I could have problems and conditions with a technical name, not the names of those that betrayed or hurt me. I'd be able to conduct more heat being made out of metals than flesh and blood. That is the one drawback. I want to be cold, frigid. I like to think, though, that my impenetrable metal shell, in the absence of a heart and loins, would accomplish that. Then the only thing I would need to go on is being plugged in to recharge. An outlet is easier to find than true love. And things like oil, love, and trust are non-renewable. We can't run on those forever. If I were a robot, all I would need to suffice me is constant energy, not unrelenting love and affection, the drive to love someone else, because that drive to find love will eventually run out of road. I'd rather just be hooked up with a hard drive. I basically want to be a computer with a search engine for information only, not love. I long to be a robot.
Okay, our next presenter is Alan Davis. Alan is a senior of Southwest Minnesota State University, pursuing a degree in English with a creative writing emphasis. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, he moved to Minnesota's Twin Cities with his family during his middle school years and has lived there since. He has been at SMSU since 2018 and became the winner of the college's Leo Dangle Creative Writing and Literature Scholarship in 2020. His plans after college focus primarily on publishing a novel and becoming a librarian at either a public, school, or academic library. Please welcome Alan Davis.
Okay, so my first piece is a creative nonfiction work called The Man, the Owl, and the Hawk, and it is about my relationship with the animals in my backyard. Back at my home in St. Paul, we had two large trees that occupied the front and backyard. The tree in the front yard got put down in late 2020 when it got infested with ash borers. When I return home even now, I subconsciously place the tree there until I'm left outside long enough to notice its absence. There were a lot of creatures who made their homes around that tree too. I remember a woodpecker that would frequent the spot to get the occasional grub, and there were some squirrels and chipmunks who seemed to prefer this tree to the others in the neighborhood for hiding their ill-gotten gains. We still have the large tree in our backyard, but the squirrels seem cautious about using it too much. This is likely because of the tree's other notable occupant, a wise old owl, who lives in the tree's largest hole. We aren't 100% sure what species he is, since only 2 people have ever seen him somewhat clearly with their own eyes. They were my mother and my little cousin Madison, who spotted him when they were returning to the house after a shopping trip one afternoon. They were hidden inside when, according to my mom, my cousin pointed to the large hole and said, "Auntie, look, it's an owl." My mom looked over and sure enough, 2 yellow eyes surrounded by a mask of white and gray feathers were watching them from the dark chamber. Madison thought the creature was majestic, but I laughed when I heard the story and made a mental note of the owl's continued existence. At the time, I had a troubled history with the creature. He was a mix of humble defender and prankster, as my family was constantly left with the carcasses of what we believed were his kills in the backyard. I later came to learn that much that I blamed him for was not his doing, as the manner in which the remains were left were not typical of how an owl hunted, but of a hawk, of which a red-tail lived in the area. One such kill was when I was in middle school. One day, after hearing the owl's hoots the night before, my brothers and I went in our backyard to play. We soon spotted tufts of fur on the grass accompanied by exposed pits of dirt, and at the end of the dirt trail was a small patch of pink stringy flesh. It took my brothers and I only a few minutes to conclude that a squirrel or something had tried to escape the owl and failed. The owl then consumed him and left the intestines and stomach for us to find. Back then we were trying to figure out why. Was it a peace offering? A sacrifice to the owl gods? Now I know that it was likely the work of the aforementioned red-tailed hawk, who also laid claim to our neighborhood. Unfortunately, we didn't see him in person until at least the end of that year when he made a flyby. And even after we saw him, we still blame the owl for the aftermath of the hawk's feast. There is one kill assist that we somewhat at least attribute to the owl. It occurred during the winter, the year after we saw the hawk. My father, my older brother Jared, and I were shoveling the driveway at night. Throughout our work, we heard the scuttling and knew our new furry neighbor, a small mouth, was among us. My dad believed it was living in the pile of sticks buried under the snow in the backyard and wanted it gone, so he asked us to keep an eye out for it. When we spotted the mouse, I promptly followed my instincts and screamed before slamming my shovel around like a madman. Jared looked down, shouted, "Oh shit," and followed suit. Then my father probably started reconsidering how good of a job he had done in raising his 2 manly sons, before scooping up the mouse and flinging it at the neighbor's house. We heard a wet smack, followed by a brief period of silence before the scuttling began anew. I had regained my composure, but we couldn't get to the mouse to finish it. My dad was pretty upset at the rodent's resilience, but our feathered protector had it covered. The next morning, Jerry came back inside after taking the garbage out to report the mouse was dead. A small bit of blood was on the snow just outside a hastily dug hole where the frosted-eyed rodent sat, facing the backyard's tree. Of course, they voted for me to throw it away to make up for last night's failure. Afterwards, we speculated some on how the mouse had died. The best theory we have even now is that my dad's assault wounded him with what may or may not have been a recoverable injury, after which it may have attempted to make its way back to its hole when it spotted the owl watching it from afar, waiting for it to expose itself. Knowing that leaving its makeshift cover would mean certain death, it waited and either died through its wounds, freezing to death, or a mixture of both. Whatever the case, it was an anticlimactic end for such a troublesome creature, but fitting nonetheless. There is another moment which in hindsight was more likely the work of the hawk that we attributed to the owl and his evil machinations. There had been a stray cat who had lived in and around the window well of our house's office. My mother and I had seen the gray feline resting there a few times. It looked like he enjoyed the safety of the pit, and, with the rabbit hole next to it, probably considered it a bed and breakfast if it was into munching on baby bunnies. So when my dad came from the office one day and told Jerry to grab a shovel and remove a corpse from the well, it shouldn't have been too confusing for me to deduce why. Initially, I didn't think about the cat. I assumed some rabbit got stuck in there, as they do, and died before we rescued it. Or that some dumb squirrel thought the power lines looked like black licorice and got itself fried before falling in. When Jerry came back inside, I asked him how it went and learned what happened to the cat. He said that when he investigated the well, he thought it was the corpse of a snake. That was until he picked it up and realized two things. First, the snake was furry. Second, there was a single hind leg attached to it. I think the owl got to it, he said. Don't know why he left the spine. Could have at least cleaned up after himself. I was pretty upset and blamed the owl like my brother did. But with the knowledge I have now, it's easier to shift that irritation to the hawk. I didn't own the cat, nor was it a member of the family, but he was kind of a feature of the neighborhood, and his loss was felt. I can only imagine how many neighbors' cats have run away or disappeared during the hawk's active season, but it wasn't long before behavior indicative of it ceased. Ever since I started college, I have heard no confirmed corpses in the backyard. In all likelihood, the hawk simply moved locations, as I doubt he's dead. Hence, my relationship with the creature in my backyard has been awkward. It always took my brothers and I out of our groove when we found animal guts or a squirrel rug back there. Meanwhile, our poor owl neighbor had to deal with the barking of dogs, sirens wailing day in and day out, and the screaming of its neighbor's children as it tried to rest before his evening duties. Yet, even with the interruption from both our ends, I appreciate the old birds of prey and the presence of the wildlife that has graced my area. They almost serve as mascots and welcome reminders to nature's many magnificent specimens that I share my home with. So, I hope the hawk is enjoying his life right now, wherever he is, and that he visits us again soon. So my next 4 pieces are all poems. They all have a loose or heavy fantasy theme depending on the work. The first one is Creative Minds, which is about childhood and the imagination of children. Only through a child's eyes can a frog become a princess, with her warts now freckles and slummy mug a soft smile. Only through a child's eyes can a storm be a vengeful god, with terrible twisters its legs and swirling clouds wild hair. Only through a child's eyes, with the daily wonders they see, can a flimsy and rotten stick turn into an ancient artifact of destiny. Within a child's innocent mind are crafted wondrous and terrible things, trinkets to be reveled from dawn till dusk, until the day they're forced to give them up. My next piece is about an obscure Welsh fairy monster called a puka. It is a shape-shifting goblin that can either be benevolent or malicious, depending on the stories told about it. The piece is called All Puka Tell the Truth. Humans may call me a monster because of my cunning and might. I'd say I provide simple services for needy peasants and nobles alike. You must be so hopelessly lost in my woods with no guide, with the path obscured by fickle thorns. The forest is changing around you as the trees twist into screaming faces, boulders shatter by an unseen foe, and foreboding winds sing of your doom. So it's great luck, I must say, that I have found you here, I, the kindly and bright-furred puka, whose grim eyes compel you to pray. Now hop on my back as I urge against waiting for better aid. There is nothing alive for many miles, and I'll truly ask for so little in return. A small favor I will request, one simple thing upon arrival, to your home just past the hills, and denying it would not be best. Behold now my malleable form, as it shifts better to serve thee, wings from arms, talons from hooves, beak and crest from fangs and horn. Oh, please, cease your quivering. There is no malice in my offer, nor a plummet from the sky to fear. Ignore the wind's warning to the contrary. I am your last hope, for alas, without me, you shall perish. Now stop questioning my words and get that ass upon my back. So, my next poem is called In the Meanlock's Den. It is from a obscure monster in a tabletop game I play called Dungeons and Dragons. And I had ran an adventure with it and then wrote the poem afterwards. After I'd thoroughly creeped out my poor player. You'll hear voices all around, some loud, some soft. Some speak to me, others of me. Sounds linger all over this place, some carried by the air, above in the ceiling, or beneath the floor. And the voices in my head? Well, they like to whisper, all day and all night, saying that I should stay. And I'd believe them if it wasn't for their clicking, that unbearable click, 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 click of many mandibles and little claws in an endless chorus of insanity. It accompanies their voices, the ones that tell me to stay, and promise safety if I do. They say that I only need to descend deeper below, that I can be with them, as to not be alone. They have admitted to me that they are no longer human. So if I joined them, what clicking thing would I become? Will every word I speak or scream be followed by that sinister click, 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 click? I do not know, nor do I, still a man, wish to know. But the clicking is creeping closer, while their voices are growing louder. And now my last piece is called An Undergraduate's Lair, and ironically, it was a piece I wrote in my freshman year for my first poetry class. From move-in day to senior year, the dormitory is their sanctuary, a familiar echo of their distant home, a reflection of their dreams and goals. Within its confines, their word is law, as time obeys both their rowdy and silent calls. Day in and day out, they embrace every new interaction with those drawn to the campus grounds, and every morning they cautiously prepare to venture out of the safety of their retreat and into the noisy world just beyond its embrace. No soul or amount of snow can deter them from their crusade, for they are determined to see it to the end. Their collections grow along with their skills as more gifts and boons are offered to them by kindred spirits and ambitious companions. But eventually, it will be time to depart, and for them to claim a new domain, somewhere out there in the open sky, where uncountable treasures anxiously wait. Nevertheless, they will always remember and hoard the baubles and memories once stored within their lair. Thank you.
Next up is Victoria Simon. Victoria is a creative writing major originating from Northeast Minneapolis, the place she calls home. During her 4 years at SMSU, Victoria had the opportunity to take several workshops which helped propel her knowledge of the craft. Victoria writes in a way that is deeply personal and introverted on the surface, but contained beneath are raw, painful, realistic emotions that can be relatable on a larger scale. Victoria hopes to publish a collection of poems one day that helps people understand parts of themselves that they didn't before, because literature has been the place where she has found solace in her own life. Please welcome Victoria Simon.
So the first piece that I will be reading is a flash fiction piece about a relationship between a mother and a son. It's called Memorable Muffins. He didn't want to go out on such a night, but his mother insisted on making raspberry muffins to eat after supper. She was low on milk the recipe asked for. It wasn't that he didn't want to run errands for her, but the night was brisk. Snow was coming their way. Isaiah tried to reason with her, telling her that they could eat muffins tomorrow or even the next day. It was a weak attempt at saving himself from the blistering weather because his mother continued her insistence. It had been like that with his mom for a while now, the persistence and need to complete the running tasks in her mind, thrashing against her skull, begging for a sense of relief. She would become frantic, panicked about finishing what she was doing before her mind blanked out. Soon, Isaiah was taking on some of his mom's load. It was simple tasks at first, making sure that the door was locked or checking the stove every time he came into the kitchen to make sure she turned it off. This is how all mental illnesses start, the doctor had told them when they went to the hospital for the first time. Slowly and graciously, then all at once and destructive in its path of controlling the mind and body. They weren't much help for him, insisting that there really wasn't anything they can do for his mom, that she would have to learn and adapt. Isaiah spent months cursing the doctors for being so nonchalant about her condition, then finally gave in to the help. It was the least he could do. His mom was a single parent who gave her all to him with no hesitation. If she needed help remembering things, Isaiah would be her guy, always. He readied himself for the harsh winds that were whistling outside of the door. He grabbed the set of keys that were hung next to a grandfather clock in the hallway, leading to the exit. His mom would tell him stories from before he was born of her childhood home, with the most beautiful grandfather clock sitting in the foyer. That was long ago, before he had to remind her of the date and what she had for breakfast. Isaiah geared up in his winter coat and scarf, wrapping his neck up and slinging on the heavy protection. Looking out of the window, he could see the wind picking up the fresh snow on the ground and whipping it through the air. Taking a breath of preparation, Isaiah reached for the copper handle. Before he could turn the knob, he felt a tug at the elbow of his coat. "Where are you going?" His mother looked up at him with confusion smeared across her fragile features. "The store, Ma, for the milk." "Milk? Milk for what?" The confusion still rather apparent on his mother's espresso face. He sighed and rubbed the skin between his brows. This was how it worked. If he got lucky enough, he could help his mother in completing her tasks. He never knew when she would forget until he saw the same mask of confusion resting upon her face. Only then would he understand what was happening. "Nothing, Ma. Don't worry about it," he replied with a trained smile. His mother shook her head, pulling him away from the door while unzipping his coat and tugging at the sleeve. As she ushered her son back in the house, Isaiah heard her muttering something to herself. Making out as much as he could, he realized she was lecturing him. And no son of mine will be sneaking out to mess around in this kind of weather. He smiled to himself, thinking back to the days when he would attempt to run off in the late hours, saying he was picking up something at the store. He had been a rather obnoxious kid, always giving his mom a hard time. His smile slowly began fading as realization set in. The last time he ran away to hang out somewhere was when he was no more than 17 years old. He looked up at his mom as she walked towards the kitchen. She was getting worse. She didn't see the 26-year-old standing in front of her, but instead the 17-year-old that snuck around the back of her memories. It was no longer forgetting to turn off the oven or reminding him 10 times over to pick up her prescriptions. His mom was running backwards in her mind, trudging through decades of memory, unable to decipher the past from the present. "Oh, honey, I need some milk from the store. I want to make muffins, but I don't have enough," his mom called out from the kitchen. Glancing down, he could see her getting out the rest of the ingredients. A wide grin plastered across her face. They were, after all, one of his favorite treats, and boy did his mom love spoiling her only child. "I got it, Ma." The smile that was placed on his face resembled a mixture of pain and the looming grievance as he pulled his coat back on and headed out the door before his mother lost her place inside herself and pulled him back in. Okay, so for the next piece, I have a creative nonfiction piece that is a retelling of an event that took place when I was younger. It's called Mommy Issues. Having a mother is important in any little girl's life. A mother is supposed to be the one who nurtures you, helps you grow up, and teaches you how to enter womanhood. This wasn't the case with my mother. She happened to be a more complex person. My mother is addicted to methamphetamines, quite a big word for a child to hear throughout her life. I'm not sure when her addiction started. I have asked numerous times and numerous people in my life, but they all either gave vague answers or no answers at all. But for as long as I remember, my mom's number one priority in her life was getting her next fix. As young as the age of 5, I would be left alone with no supervision while pipes and drugs rested within easy reach. It wasn't intentional. My mom just liked to have her things where she could access them. Don't touch that powder, baby. That ain't for little girls. Leave that alone. That isn't good for you. Why don't you just go to your room and Mama will come tuck you in when she's done. That's Mommy's little helper, baby. As a kid, I couldn't help but wonder why Mommy got to touch things that I couldn't, and if these things were so bad, then why does she get to use them? Of course, getting older and learning what Mommy's little helper actually was cleared up a lot of questions for me. My mom let her addiction take full control of her life, like many who struggle with similar problems. As her main priority, she often left the apartment to visit her friends 2 floors above and spent that visit getting outrageously high. She'd tell me, "Don't go opening any doors and don't go answering the intercom. Mommy will be back in a couple minutes." A couple minutes would easily turn into a couple hours. There were days more often than not that I would be taking care of my 2-year-old brother. Changing diapers at 5? Easy if the baby remained still. Feeding him at 5? Harder. I could not reach the formula or baby food and would be stuck giving him apple juice and Cheerios. She would always come back, though. Never did my 5-year-old brain doubt that. When I watched her walk into the apartment, she wouldn't look like herself. Of course, she looked the same as she always did, but even at such a young age, I was aware of the shift in her energy. Her eyes glazed over and absent, her face tight but drooping at the same time. She would speak very little and get angry very fast. No matter how angry, she never took it out on us. My mom would not come back to me as herself, but as a deformed version of the person who gave birth to me. And while she looked frightening, she was never scary to me. This was our life for a while. Early in my childhood, I took on a parental role to my brother and helped my mother along through her addiction. It felt normal. I didn't know much of anything else. It wasn't until a few months into 2005 that my normalcy was ripped out of the ground, roots and all, and my life caught wind. My mom had gone for one of her visits with the friends upstairs. My brother was sleeping, and for once, I can't remember what I was doing. All seemed fine, then the intercom started ringing. The intercom was how visitors communicate with residents of the building to let them into the locked front entrance. My mom always told me not to answer the intercom. Today was different, though. My grandparents were coming to get me for the weekend. I ran into the bathroom, grabbed my footstool, and ran back to the door where the intercom was built into the sidewall. Clicking the red button, I let out a hello. My grandma's voice did not come back through the speaker. Instead, it was another female voice. She knew my name and was asking where my mom was. I told her she was with her friends upstairs. "Why don't you ring me in, honey, so we can see each other's face?" I clicked the green button. It will be something I struggle over the rest of my life. Within minutes, there was a swarm of people who looked like they were from the government entering my apartment. My brother was awakened, and his cries were killer. All I could see were flashes of suits and uniforms. I saw my mother running from the staircase down the hall, panic etched across her face. Whether it was panic over her children or her paraphernalia is something I'd rather not know. I don't remember how, but we made it outside the apartment complex. It was snowing and the lights from the police cars merged to create a vibrant purple hue across the brick walls. Whether it was shock or fear, my innocent brain couldn't comprehend what was going on. The lady had said she wanted to talk. Next thing I hear is my mom's breathless screams from the entrance of the complex. I turned and saw a green Cadillac parked next door. My grandma had made it. So the next 3 pieces I'll be reading are poetry pieces. The first one is called Deep Breaths. It's about panic attacks and kind of anxiety as a whole. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. It begins like the sun rising on the horizon. Warmth turns to a sweltering heat, colliding with the dews that layer the palm leaves extending from soil. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Waves crashing upon the shore, Undulating peaks of trepidation meeting upon the surface of the undisturbed placement of sand. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Just as it rises, it will begin to fall. Warmth fading to a trickling light, palms retreating, waiting for the matrimony of daybreak and dew. Inhale. Exhale. The next piece is titled Midnight Mirage. It's kind of about right person, wrong time, and the idea of one-night stands and the culture behind it. Streetlights shine down on fingers, grazing skin in the cool breeze, fleshing smooth cheeks into hot flames of carnal temptation. A mutual understanding that interlocking on such intimate levels does not mean reaching a connection of similar depth. Tinctures of lust for second-hand lovers seeking to grasp onto a moment in time where love can briefly be requited. As the night begins to retire and dawn makes her arrival, lovers lie in syncopated silence, breathing in the smell of wasted potential. And then for my last piece, it's titled He's Been Waiting. It is a poem about the Grim Reaper. No creature will escape the glide of midnight robes against soft earth. The lifelong game of hide and seek, a race this fleshy body will succumb to, an eternal call to wade back into the cold and dark abyss, taking claim through the hands of a stranger, lover, or friend, that shape-shifter of skill, waiting in the shadows since conception, guiding souls into the after. Thank you.
Our last presenter is Mackenzie Swanson. Mackenzie grew up in the Ballatin area. She attended SMSU back in 2018 and took an active role in both the English Club and the Perceptions Club on campus. Today, she lives in New Ulm, Minnesota, and thanks to COVID, has the opportunity to take classes online to complete her creative writing major. Please welcome Mackenzie Swanson.
A Night to Remember is a fictional short story I wrote about an 11-year-old boy named Christian who goes to a bonfire with his parents on a cold winter day. We were bumping down an old tar road, dodging snowdrifts that had blown in the night before as the silence in our small pickup truck pressed in around me. I watched the landscape that has been transformed. Trees dance in the breeze, their branches sparkle in the sun. The farmland surrounding us has become a white Saharan desert with miles of rolling plains. My father breaks the silence. Are we still going the right way? Just a little further, it will be on your right, Mom says, while still looking out the passenger window, and Dad grips the steering wheel until his knuckles turn white. My mother turns around to look at me and changes the subject. Christian, are you excited to see Ellen? I only nod, and frigid silence envelops us until we pull up to the house. It is a moderate-sized two-story surrounded by a grove of trees and miles of what I assume to be farmland, though all that can be seen are endless plains of stark white hills. The house is all peeling white siding and shabby doors. The Christmas lights are still up even though it's well into January. To the right of the house, Moreau's cows call to one another in the barn, but are far enough away that the noise isn't deafening. A Quonset stands on the other side of the property, a huge half-cylinder of a building, sure to be full of some farm equipment. A large bonfire is glowing from the backyard. My parents and I circle the house, keeping to the shoveled path. When Ellen sees me, she comes running up and barrels into me, tackling me into the snow. The cold tickles my nose and chafes her cheeks. Beneath her hat, her curly brown hair is full of snow, and I want to brush it away to feel how soft her hair is. My heart beats like a hummingbird's. The hard staccato in my chest makes it difficult to think. I push away these thoughts. Instead, I laugh and try to push her off, flinging a handful of snow at her. She shrieks, climbs off, and begins making a snow angel. I follow her lead, and my parents continue towards the fire. A dozen adults stand close to the roaring flames, brown bottles in their hands, and I see a few other kids who I recognize from school. They're all younger, though. Ellen and I both turned 12 in February. We throw snowballs at one another, and soon the other kids join in. Afterwards, we get Ellen's old sled from behind the Quonset and slide down a sloping hill in the backyard. When our fingers and toes go numb, we walk over to the warm ourselves by the bonfire. Mom and Dad used to take me camping during the summer when I was younger, and sometimes I even got to toast marshmallows over a small fire. Dad would set tiny twigs ablaze, and it would never last long. This fire is nothing like that. An entire tree had been cut up with large branches feeding the flames. This fire is almost twice the size of the farmhouse and lights up the now dark sky. My father sees us and circles the fire in our direction. He weaves a little and slurs when he asks where Mother went. It's time we got home. His eyes don't focus, and I get a little nervous. Dad doesn't drink. Ice forms in the pit of my stomach. I'll go find her, I promise. I pull Ellen's arm, and we begin our search by looking in the house. We remove our winter gear and follow the hallway inside. A woman approaches us, and I self-consciously smooth down my flannel shirt, hoping I look presentable. Who's this? Ellen's mother asks while giving me the once-over. This is Christian. He's Kurt and Abby's son. I shove my hand forward eagerly. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Moreau. You have a beautiful home. She ignores my hand and turns back to her daughter. What are you doing inside? Looking for Christian's mom. Have you seen her? Mrs. Moreau's face crystallizes and says, She's not in here. Ellen and I share a look, shrug, then walk out of the house. We wander around the farmhouse, not in any rush to be going. In a swift moment of indecision, I grab a hold of her hand and interlock our fingers. I cast a covert glance to see that Ellen is beaming. My mind blows in 1,000 different winds, and I never want this night to end. We stroll over to the vehicles, still pretending to be looking for my mom. Dad leans against our truck. He looks like he might be dozing off. Ellen turns to leave, but then Dad sees us. He looks worse than before. A large glass bottle with clear liquid is in his hands, and he squints in our direction. I try to swallow the lump in my throat. Where's your mother at, boy? He slurs. Icicles form in my veins. I nudge Ellen, trying to get her to go. Dad lunges for me. I backpedal, but I'm not fast enough. His right arm swings for my face, and all I can do is watch the heavy fist approach. The hit sends me flying into the snow. I scramble away, and he topples over. Ellen hurries to me, and we run for the Quonset. Making our way inside, we sit down on a bale of hay, and she looks at me. The fear I see in her face leaves me raw. Let me see your forehead, she says coolly. She grabs my head in her hands and examines the cut. I'm fine, I lie, though it has nothing to do with my head. I feel like a blizzard, cold and raging, leaving complete silence in my wake. Just then, the rear door opens, followed by a cold gust of wind. There are several hay bales blocking our line of vision, and Ellen grasps my hand tightly, her eyes wide with terror. I can't let my father near her. Quietly, we get up and creep towards the front door. A woman's giggle stops us in our tracks. A man's deep voice murmurs something to her. That sounds like my dad, whispers Ellen. We wait a moment, just to be safe, but don't hear anything else. We should tell him what happened. Maybe he can help. I nod in agreement, and we make our way over to the other side of the room. Two lone figures are pressed up against a hay bale, kissing and touching each other. Ellen's father looks up, and I notice the woman he's with is my mother. I become a glacier, unable to move. My mother and I share a look, then she quickly pushes away from the man. That broke the spell. I grab Ellen and thrust her towards the door. She starts crying, and there's nothing I can do. We take off for the little grove of woods that surrounds the farm. Ellen tries to pull away from me. I'm probably hurting her by how hard I'm grabbing her, but I keep yanking. We need to get away. Away, 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 I chant. I hide us behind a tree and hold her tight as sobs rack both of our bodies. It feels as if hours pass, both of us tired and shivering in the cold. We don't look at each other as we get up and slowly make our way back to the farmhouse. Ellen runs inside, and I decide it's probably for the best. The fire has died down, and everyone has left or gone inside, all except for my mother. She sits, wrapped in a blanket, gazing into the embers, a dead look in her eyes that I'd never really noticed before. She turns, and I see a black eye beginning to form. That I have seen. My mother scoots over on the bench and holds the blanket open for me. A slow minute passes. I feel numb. Quietly, I walk over and sit beside her. "You should put something cold on your eye. Keep the swelling down," I murmur. She nods and grabs a handful of snow and gently places it on her face. We don't move. We don't say anything. We just sit there, frozen and replaying the night over and over. My next piece, Lifeline, is a villanelle poem I had written about a girl in a bar. I grab again for my drink, give it a swirl, try not to overthink. A man walks in, his gait a slink, quickly adjust my curls, grab again for my drink. His hair and soul as black as ink, maybe I should give this a whirl, try not to overthink. For a moment I shrink, watching his lust unfurl, I grab again for my drink. The floor becomes an ice skating rink, the room begins to twirl, try not to overthink. He looks me over and with a wink asks, "Ready to go, girl?" I grab again for my drink and try not to overthink. For my next piece, art has always been a part of my life, and hiding behind my Mona Lisa is an iambic blank verse poem about that appreciation and interpretation of it. I slide into my Mona Lisa smile so I can wipe the doubts from my glass face, as picture perfect as an icicle. But if you look into my eyes, you'll see the reality of a Picasso and the sickening swirl of a Van Gogh. I sew on a carefully selected mask to cover all of my hideous flaws. Becoming the angelic Sistine Chapel isn't easy when your heart is full of fire. I Should Know Better is a litany poem that speaks out against rape culture and victim blaming. I know that good girls don't get that drunk. I know I must have been asking for it with that dress. I know girls just want to have fun, but boys will be boys. I know my inebriated mind didn't consent. I know that to be a woman, I should just shut up and be happy. I know that no will be lost in a drunken scramble. I know I should have seen the warnings, but he was a friend. I know that it was never my fault. In an elementary school in spring, a teacher usually has a fun craft to make and take home for your mom on Mother's Day. My last story, Stained Glass Heart, is a nonfiction piece I wrote about one such craft. It was the last week of 4th grade. I could practically smell the freedom in the classroom air. No more homework, no more school for 3 whole months. The rest of the class was just as charged as I was. We were like popcorn on the stove, popping in our seats, hardly able to stay still. Luckily, our teachers understood and went easy on us. Movies and games were played in every class. In homeroom, Miss Anderson handed out our choice of colors of thick cardstock paper and 3 different colors of tissue paper swatches. I took a light pink color for the cardstock and blue, purple, and green for the tissue paper. I carefully set each piece of paper on my desk, making sure they were nice and neat while I waited for the teacher to explain what we were going to do. We were told that we were going to make a Mother's Day card, she said, with a large stained glass heart on the cover. Crafts always went over well, and the students turned to one another to share a quick smile before Miss Anderson went on telling us the rest of the instructions. They were easy enough. Write a heartfelt message saying whatever you wanted to say about your mom, thanking her for everything that she does for you. Everyone immediately got to work. I was left staring at my card, struggling for something to write. Maybe I shouldn't write it? I fidgeted with my marker and debated. A moment went by, and I decided to steal a glance around the room. The teacher was helping another girl spell a word correctly, so I leaned over to see what my friend was writing. The card was your typical 4th grade Mother's Day card. I love you, Mom. You're the greatest ever. Thanks for being my mom. XOXO. Pretty simple. I could come up with something. I turned back to my own card and quickly jotted down a message. I flipped it over and started on the front. We were supposed to cut up the tissue paper and glue the pieces inside of an outline of a heart so it looked like stained glass. I finished and raised my hand to inform my teacher. She came over and told me to wait patiently while everyone else finished. "Can I see your card?" Miss Anderson asked amicably. I gave an indifferent shrug, but I held my breath and nudged it closer to her. She read it, then gave me a tight smile and awkwardly walked back to the front of the classroom. "All right, everybody, it's time for your next class. Start cleaning up." I let out my breath. Carefully, I put my card in a folder so it wouldn't get crumpled. Miss Anderson took us to our next class. My friends were talking about what they had put on their cards. Will I even be able to give the card to my mom? I kept silent, and the other kids stared at me out of the corner of their eyes. For the rest of the day, I kept thinking about my card and couldn't wait for the day to be done. When school was over, I ran the 3 blocks to my grandma's. She used to watch me after school until my dad got off of work, and I excitedly opened my book bag to make sure I hadn't forgotten the card at school. It was technically a few days before Mother's Day, but I was sure that she wouldn't mind. I read and reread the card, hoping that I did a good job and that my mom would like it. I proudly showed the card to my grandma. She hugged me and said it was perfect. After I was sure she actually meant it, a smile spilled out of me. I couldn't even try to contain it. Finally, my dad got off of work and picked me up. I got in the car and my smile wilted. I got a gnawing feeling in my stomach. Could I even ask him? I wasn't sure how he'd react, and his emotions seemed to be all over the place when I tried to talk about Mom. Maybe I shouldn't bring it up. Dad picked up on my mood change and asked me about it. I twisted my fingers together, staring at my nails rather than looking at him. "We made cards today in school." One finger had the beginnings of a hangnail, so I delicately tore it off. "What kind of cards?" he urged. With a deep breath in, I quickly said, "Mother's Day cards. I was hoping we could maybe go see Mom sometime soon so I could give it to her." Silence. I started to fiddle with another finger, eyes locked firmly on the task in front of me. "I suppose we could do that. If you want, we could go over there tonight." Peeking over at my dad, I saw a firm grip on the steering wheel and him attempting to smile. I grinned back at him. After a year of living together, our relationship was finally a little less strained than when it had started. My brother and sister were considerably older, so it was just my dad and me now. We drove a few miles before parking and getting out of the truck. We walked up a small gravel road, and soon we were on the grass. Each step seemed to be heavier than the last, until my feet felt like lead and I slowed down. Do I really want to do this? Dad grabbed my hand and gave it a little squeeze. I bit my lip and took the last few steps up to the cold stone, which was now where my mother was. A small granite plaque was all that greeted me. Lori Janine Rand, December 19, 1957 to April 27, 2004. Beloved mother of Megan, Timothy, and Mackenzie. I stepped up to it and purposely didn't think about that night. The brain aneurysm or me playing doctor when my mom had a bad headache. Instead, I thought about her. Warm hugs, baked goodies, and an unconditional love. Grabbing the card, I set it by the bouquet of fake flowers that was set out by the cemetery's caretakers until the weather got a little nicer and people brought their own flowers for their loved ones. Dad put an arm around me and guided me back to the truck. I leaned into him, the heavy weight was gone, and I felt lighter than I had in over a year. I thought about the message I had written. Dear Mom, I loved you. You're the best. Thanks for always watching over me from heaven. Love, Kenzie.
Thank you all again for coming. I know some of you have to get to class, but if you have a minute to spare, do come and let Taylor and Alan and Victoria and Mackenzie know what a fine job they did today. Thank you.